Well, folks, it's time to talk about some custom cards. And this time around, we have cards with weird, unusual stat lines, like the Reckless Wolf here from Minivat. It's a 1 mana 3/0. That's right, a 0 health minion. So under normal circumstances, if you play the Reckless Wolf here, it would just die, which might actually be interesting if you have some advantage to killing beasts, some card that rewards your beast deaths, for instance. This might be a 1 mana way to cycle that, or draw a card, or do whatever thing it does. But beyond that, if you do things like hand buff this card, for instance, you're getting this really high upside. Like it could be a 4/1 for 1 mana with Rush, and you're getting all this kind of extra value packed onto the attack and the keyword because of this downside. So as soon as you start working around that downside of this unusual stat line, then suddenly all this upside starts to be extracted. And we've seen some hand buff rush stuff succeed in Warrior. There's kind of that package in Hunter as well, which might be able to play additionally to the Beast side. So I think there's kind of two interesting angles to use this card in a weird way. Plus, of course, from a flavor standpoint, this is a Reckless Wolf that's just kind of running in and dying, and it looks almost a little frail and weak too. So I think this delivers in a lot of directions for making an unusual stat line a pretty compelling card. We've also got here the Incorrigible Tank from Dr. Quilbert J. Fish, a 6 mana 1/10, another very unusual stat line. He's got Charge and Taunt, and each turn this is in your hand, gain +1, -1. So essentially this card's stats start swapping the longer he's been holding in hand, and he's like one of those tanks you can't convince to slow down. He's just like going too hard and too fast, and as time goes on, he becomes more likely to charge instead of being a useful defensive tool. So great flavor delivery here on the name, and I would say the artwork as well here for the tank. So the turn you draw this, it's just like this meat shield. You can maybe plop down as a big interruption card, but if you wait a while, this could essentially get up to eventually a 9/1 charge minion for 6 mana. So if you hold this in your opener, maybe you can play it pretty early for some burst damage. I mean, not even that early, right? You're still waiting until sort of the late game, but it could be a 6 attack charge fairly reasonably on curve, for instance. Or if you top deck it late, it's going to be a long time before you get to use this. So I think there is some natural balance built in. Now, it's not a legendary, so you can have 2 of these, going to increase the likelihood to have 1 in hand. That said, you're sitting on a dead card the whole game, so compared to other charge minions like Leroy's or Mr. Smites, this has some notable downsides, but I really like the way this one plays off of the flavor and the weird stat line, and kind of creates these friction points where you have to make big decisions, and it's like, man, maybe 3 attack is enough for this. Maybe just play it and get a pretty high health minion down. Maybe that's better than trying to wait for it to be 9 attack. So I think really cool design here that plays nicely off these weird stat lines for sure. So next appears the Pile of Coins from Wufang. It's a 2 mana 0/8, and it reads, whenever this takes damage, add a coin to your hand. I love this idea of this just pile of coins laying around, and as you whack at it, coins kind of fly off, and you get to keep one, essentially. I think that's really funny. So basically a big way to gain a lot of extra mana if you play into this. And no deck comes immediately to mind to use this well, but we've seen things like in Rage Warrior in the past where you can damage your own minion successfully, and maybe accruing all these coins in hands opens up some sort of combo opportunity that wouldn't otherwise exist. Maybe just give this taunt and force your opponent to attack into it so you can really accelerate some mana. I think there's a few different ways to use the Pile of Coins to some degree of success here. Also, it looks like Wufang went to the trouble of photoshopping all these coins together, which I gotta respect that, instead of just using some stock coin pile artwork, which I'm sure would be out there. So yeah, I think this is really neat to get a 0 attack minion with some value. We've seen these sorts of stat lines before, things like Doomsayers and such, but I like the way that this one takes the health and puts it into a really direct application of the card. Like the health really matters quite directly for how the card works. So yeah, this is a neat card. Maybe could be broken by certain decks, but I think would probably be a fine and cool addition to Hearthstone. So next up here is Seriana the Soul Merger. This one's a little spooky, I have to say. Maybe too good, but pretty cool nonetheless. And it looks so Demon Hunter-y, I have to say. Like, that art matches the card perfectly. This is from the HB Hero. It's a 6 mana 1/13 with Charge, Lifesteal, and Taunt. Now, most people are going to want to play a 1 attack Charge and Lifesteal minion. Probably not all that exciting, but it's got a battle cry. Swap your hero's attack and health with this minions. So essentially, if you buff up your hero attack, you play a couple Furies or something, hero power, you get yourself up to like 7 attack. You play Seriana, she's going to get 7 attack. Now, she might also get 30 health if you still had 30 health in that point in the game, which of course makes her absolutely crazy insane, and why I said this card might be a little too good. We have single target removal in Hearthstone, but not every deck has single target removal in Hearthstone. And a card like this would sort of demand it right now because, if you had a 30 health lifesteal taunt, that's going to end a lot of games, even if you don't care about the charge aspect. But it does put you at 13 health as the Demon Hunter, so there's some risk there. If you put it enough like burst damage, they might just be able to go over the top. Now, that said, I still think this card's just too strong because the way attack works right now, you can attack for like 7 damage, and the attack still reads on your hero, so you can still buff her, making this like a 14 damage combo. So I like a lot about this card. I love the idea of like swapping from hero to minion, but I think right now it's just major balance problems. I think this has to be either like lower health to increase the kind of risk exposure where you almost die if you play this because it's such a high upside, or maybe just more mana to make that charge damage like less risky. So some cool things to put up here, but I think this needs to be like an 8 mana, 1/8 or something, just to really put your health at risk. Maybe even like a 1/6 or something to make this super scary to play in a lot of ways. Because otherwise, I think the kind of burst potential and swing potential is just far too high. But still, a really neat idea to play around with. So moving on here, we've got Fair Weather Silas from Andrew Jackson. I love the design of this card because it plays off of the original Silas, all about rotating minions in a carousel style. Because with this one, it's a 12 mana, 12/4, super weird stat line, by the way. We always see 4 12s, but where are all the 12/4s? And it reads, whenever you play a corrupted card, rotate this minion's cost, attack, and health clockwise wherever it is. So essentially, as soon as you play one corrupted card, this becomes a 12 mana 4/12. Then as soon as you play another one, it becomes a 4 mana 12/12, which is where you want to land it. So basically, after playing 2 corrupted cards, Silas becomes a nasty body on board, basically a super 4-drop tempo play. The question is, can you corrupt and play 2 corrupted cards by then? Because they have to be corrupted, not corrupt. So most decks wouldn't be able to do that very successfully by turn 4. So then you get into the scenario where it's like, oh man, maybe I'm playing this on turn 5 or 6 or 7. And the stats, of course, become a little bit less impactful because this is just a big stat dump, which historically hasn't always been super successful in Hearthstone. So there's this kind of deck building challenge and requirement and timing requirement where if this isn't in hand and you've played a 3rd corrupted card and kind of reverted these stats into a bad spot again, you're like, ugh, now I kind of have to wait even longer to get Silas going. So maybe not the most competitive card technically. I'm not sure this would even work all that well, but such a cool design. Swapping the stats on the fly based on the mechanic from this expansion, Silas being a Dark Moon card. Just really, really cool design. Playing off the carousel, the corrupted, and so on. I like this one a lot. So moving on here to Balnazar, the Risen Lord from Magic Milk, a 3 mana 0/0. I love it. That is a weird stat line indeed. It's got Rush and Lifesteal and Battlecry. Steal 1 attack and health from all friendly minions. So, the idea here is you've got this terrible stat line, but if you get this upside, you can convert maybe base vanilla stats on board into Rush and Lifesteal stats. So you get this upgrade in quality of your stats. So you have a board full of imps. Maybe you just send them face for a little bit of chip damage and then trade those little imps into some big old stats on Balnazar to help you stabilize or take a swing on board, essentially, or maybe just make a more threatening minion, essentially. There's also some Death Rattle activation stuff where this could pop a Death Rattle on your side of the board by killing something. The 1 health steal is like a little awkward for egg decks, because there's only 1 Balnazar in your deck. So you just like putting your egg to 0/1 may not feel particularly compelling. So I wonder if there wasn't some way to make this deal 2 attack and health for that exact interaction. But there are still other ways to use Balnazar, and I like the idea here. I do fear there's not quite enough upside because you're kind of trading in your own stats. I don't know if this could have stole stats from every other minion. That might be too powerful to debuff your opponent's board. But with cards like Shadow Word Devour and Ancient Voidhound doing that already to some extent, it might be possible to find a better middle ground where it could do both. Maybe make it like 4 or 5 mana as a kind of better Ancient Voidhound that has to build from 0 instead of, being this crazy high cost threat. So still a really cool idea. Just wonder if there's some tweaks here and there that might really increase the viability here of Balnazar. All right, so this is Living Blade from Blue Zombie Blood, a weapon here. It's a 4-mana 4/13. Crazy weapon stat line indeed. And with this one, you can't attack heroes, but while you're attacking, this weapon takes damage instead of you. So essentially, as long as you've taken only up to 13 damage, this gives you kind of immunity while attacking, which I think makes this a really cool mid-game removal card. You just keep up with your opponent's minions through the mid game without really taking a lot of damage. If you think about killing like 4/4s, for instance, with this minion, you can basically kill 4/4s with this guy without taking any damage. And I think that's really nice throughout the mid game. Just play this once and you're kind of keeping up with stuff on board for the next few turns, which I could see some warrior decks using very successfully. And it's important that this can't go face, because otherwise, it would just be 13 attacks to face, because the durability wouldn't be getting checked when you take that return trade damage, essentially. So really elegant design here, I think, and I like the idea of this blade that's like taking the damage because it's alive. Essentially, this kind of like elementally infused blade is pretty nifty, and I think 13 is like a good number for this one too. I think the stats on this make a lot of sense, both on the front and back end. So it feels to me pretty balanced and a cool design that utilizes stats in a pretty atypical fashion. All right, so moving on here to the Flicker Bot from Magic Milk. This is one of the most like realistic looking Hearthstone cards I can remember ever seeing in a custom card video. Like, you could convince me this was in the game and I just forgot about it. This is a 2-mana 4/1 mech for Rogue. Battlecry, swap this minion's stats with your weapons. I guess there should technically be some possessive apostrophes there in minions and weapons, but we'll let it slide. It still looks pretty realistic to me. And I love this idea, having a minion here that trades with your weapon. So this is kind of like, a buff to your weapon of sorts, just turning like your 1/1 hero power weapon, for instance, into a 4/1. If you've already swung with it once, like that's just an upside. You basically get a 3 damage bonus that could go face, but you take this kind of downside risk. That said, also, if this is in hand and you start like buffing it or doing shenanigans with it somehow, like, man, you could really create a crazy weapon with Flickerbot. That's not something Rogue is great at doing necessarily. They don't have as many hand buff tools as other classes, but there are still shenanigans that could be possible and exist there, and turn this into a really interesting mechanic. At a base level, is this good or worth it, or good enough for like weapon decks? I don't think so. It doesn't feel super competitive. Like, I think you'd have to make it like 4/2 or maybe even a 3/2 to make it feel better, like give yourself a really nice weapon to work off of. But I don't care. It's just a really fun idea and designed for a card. So, the upside potential of hand buffs and interesting things for this one, I think takes it in a different direction and makes it pretty darn cool. And then finally here we have Gorman, the Equalizer from Zaphod, a big paladin leisure here. It's a 6-mana 1/11, indeed, a weird stat line, with a battle cry that evens out the stats of all minions and rounds it up. So essentially here you take the stat total. This is a 1/11. That's a stat total of 12. If you even that out, this is going to be a 6/6. Or say there's like a 2/7 on board. That's a stat total of 9. You round that up to 10, divided by 2. That 2/7 becomes a 5/5. So, theoretically here, if you had a board full of 2/7s or 2/6s or something, right, you could increase their stat lines quite a bit across the board as far as attack values are concerned, making this like sort of a, Bloodlust or Savage Roar of sorts on perfect board states. Now, the reality is, like, that's not actually going to happen all that often, where you're like getting this perfect kind of attack upside. And in fact, I'm not even really sure how exactly you'd use this card, because it's probably not that really good at debuffing your opponent's health either. Or if it is, like Paladin has way better ways to just set health to 1 so they can clear things. So I do think this card feels this like weird gap of like what it's supposed to do or why it exists, which is problematic in some ways, but in other ways not really, because it just feels very Paladin-y. It feels realistic. This kind of feels like a legendary that would have come out like 3 years ago, or it didn't really get played, but it's just a neat mechanic and idea, and then it kind of gets expanded on later. So yes, sure, I would like tweak the stats of Gorman, the Equalizer here. Maybe I'd make him like 3 mana or something so he feels better to play. They'd have to probably lower his stats in that case, or maybe we'd see some cards to support this one come out to make it feel really good. So, kind of filling in the gaps a little bit, like imagining what this card could be, because as it stands on its own, like, I don't know if it's enough or if it gets there, but man, it sure seems like such a fun idea and cool idea that maybe, there's this like high health paladin deck that comes around to make Gormon a really cool card. So I'm kind of looking into the future or imagining here. I definitely wanted to include this one, even if I can't see its use case right now, it feels like a really interesting card. And there you go. That wraps it up for the custom cards this time around. We got some pretty interesting designs. I have to say the power level of these, I would say on average is pretty low, which used to not be a thing for custom cards, of course. Usually they used to be powerful, but it seems like custom cards these days can't quite keep up with the power level of Hearthstone. I'm not sure any of these cards would even really be played. These are just more interesting from a design standpoint for sure. That said, I'm curious to see more designs as always, so check the description down below. I want you to submit card designs this time around that you reuse an old dead keyword. So a keyword from the past, like reborn or echo or overkill if you want. Make me a cool card using an old keyword. Look forward to seeing those. Thanks much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.